Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Moti Reber from Kansas Interfaith Action. We are a statewide faith-based issue advocacy group that works on a variety of public policy issues in Kansas, including race and discrimination, economic justice, and climate change, all of which are interrelated in some interesting ways, as I'll explain to you in a moment. I'm here to talk with you today about climate change, about why it's an important issue for people of faith, what we can do about it, and also some of its impacts on Kansas, particularly in the area of health. All right, making the connection, climate change in Kansas. And we start from a values proposition, which is that God cares about creation. And we get that straight from the creation story. The first one, there's two creation stories in Genesis. The first one says that God asks us to fill the earth and master it, and that's the one that people tend to rely on when they talk about dominion, human dominion over creation. But there's a second creation story, which is in Genesis 2, and it says that God put the human being in the Garden of Eden to till it and tend it. So in Hebrew, that's la'avod v'lishmor, so work it and guard it. There's a sense of stewardship there. There's a sense that we are allowed to even encouraged to use the resources that are in creation for our own benefit, but we are also supposed to help those resources to remain vibrant over the course of time. We're not supposed to use it up, but like if you would hire a foreman to work in your factory, we are to shepherd those resources, and that's important to God. Another quote that we like to bring is this famous one from the end of the flood story. And it says, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants, with every living being in your care, all who have gone out of the ark, all earth's animals. So this is a covenant. There's 5 covenants in the Hebrew Bible. This is the first one, and it's a covenant not only with Noah and his descendants, but with all of creation. So that we say that God is in a covenantal relationship with all of creation, a relationship of mutual care and concern, which is symbolized by the rainbow. So we take from all this that God is concerned about creation, loves creation, and wants us to take care of it. And then the other question is, who's the owner? And the owner is God. And this is from this famous psalm, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all that dwell within it. So the question is, how are we doing on that? And I'll put it to you that the answer is not very good. And there's a lot of different kinds of ways that we're not quite doing as well as we could be, but the most important one at this stage is about climate change. And climate change is in the news all the time, and there's reports coming out all the time about how the actions that we're taking are endangering creation. We've been warned about this since, I guess, about 30 years now, and we're not really doing what we need to do to address it. These are all current within the last few days. This decade is the warmest decade on record. We see all kinds of different patterns of weather and also the impact on migration, which is not going to be our focus today necessarily, but is certainly important. These are some also recent pictures. This is the one on the top left is a recent fire in California. Droughts happen more often and with more severity under climate change. And the bottom picture is the Bahamas after the hurricane this last summer. Now, hurricanes are natural disasters, but they're supercharged by climate change for a variety of reasons. There's more moisture in the air, and sea levels are already higher. These are the kinds of things, all of these are the kinds of things that we will see more of as climate change continues to worsen. Excuse me. And here's a couple of other ones that are very representative, I'd say. The top one is a glacier. There's a very famous movie called Chasing Ice, which is a lot about the receding glaciers affected by climate change. So this is the same picture. In the left, you can see how close the ice is, and on the right, how far back the ice is, how much it's receded. The bottom picture is the polar ice caps, and you can see the difference between 1984 and 2016. This particular one is a feedback loop because the ice on the top of the world bounces solar radiation back into space, and if it's not there, then that solar radiation doesn't get bounced in; it gets absorbed, thereby heating the environment even more. So I'm hoping that everybody more or less knows about the science of climate change, but I'm just going to give you a couple of bullet points here. We've known about the greenhouse effect for over 100 years. This was posited in the 1800s, and certainly we've known about climate change as we think of it now since, as I mentioned, the 80s, or some would even say the 70s. What happens with climate change is that greenhouse gases, which warm the Earth, we would not be able to survive on this planet without them. But as we burn fossil fuels, we add more greenhouse gases to the environment, and they trap heat within, keep it from radiating back out into space, thereby warming the atmosphere. The higher the concentrations of CO2 and other greenhouse gases, the warmer the atmosphere goes. And we have concentrations of CO2 that have not been seen for thousands of years. This is a very grave difference. Humankind has developed, agriculture has developed with concentrations of CO2 in a particular range. We are now far beyond that range, and we don't know what the effects are going to be. The last time we had this much CO2 in the atmosphere, the sea levels were 2 feet higher. We hope that doesn't happen because we have cities built on coasts now. We have known about, as I mentioned, we have known about climate change since the late 80s, and about half of the emissions that we put into the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution have been put in since 1988. So we have not done what we need to do in terms of bending the curve down on the emissions of greenhouse gases. Temperatures are rising as predicted. We are up over 1 degree centigrade now, and how much further we'll go depends on what we do about it from now on. If it gets to 4 degrees centigrade, that's like 7.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's bad. The international negotiators and scientists say that 1.5 degrees Celsius would be doable. 2 would be pushing it. Anything more than that would cause grave damage to the way that we've set up civilization. So that's the path that we're on because we're not doing what we need to do. So these are climate. Here's a set of climate facts which are readily available to everyone. These are the truths of climate change. It is happening. It's caused by human activity, specifically the burning of fossil fuels. It's already having impacts all around the world, including here in Kansas. We can do something about it. We are not helpless in this situation, but we need to start now. And what are the concerns about climate change in Kansas? I encourage you to visit resilientkansas.org, which is the Climate and Health Declaration, the Kansas Climate and Health Declaration, to learn more about this. But these are some of the effects that we will see in Kansas of climate change that we're already seeing. Increasing heat wave intensity, so more 100-degree days. Changes in the way agriculture is done because of the seasons changing. So things get ready to bloom before the insects get back, like that kind of thing. Misalignments of the way that we've done agriculture in the past. Longer allergy seasons, longer mosquito seasons. As the growing season moves north, we won't be able to grow the same kind of things. There's water availability, there's floods and droughts, there's all kinds of things that are concerns to people in Kansas. So this is not something that's happening somewhere overseas. Not that we shouldn't care if it was happening somewhere overseas, but it is something that's happening here at home, and something that we really need to address here at home. And we say that climate is a justice issue because, as with all justice issues, the people who are hurt the first and the worst by this are people who are least responsible for causing the problems and least able to deal with them, with the least resources to deal with them. And that's poor people, people of color, young people, old people. Churches in particular have done what they call mission work in the developing world for many, many years. So sending money to hospitals, healthcare, education, nothing but nets. And those people in particular are being hurt by climate change. But as I mentioned, it's not just them, it's us as well. But if we're concerned for the least fortunate, if we're concerned for the least of these, then we particularly need to be concerned about climate change, because this is going to have an impact. It is already having an impact on people who are least responsible for it. So we caused their problem by burning fossil fuels so profligately. So that's why why we bear the responsibility for addressing it first and foremost. And of course, this is something that faith communities all over the world have come to recognize. Most of our faith traditions these days really take climate change very seriously. Pope Francis wrote an encyclical called Laudato Si several years ago, which talked significantly about this. But this is a message that you could find in any of the mainline churches, in the Jewish tradition, in the Muslim tradition, in the Catholic tradition, that climate change, because science is real, and we need to address these issues because of our responsibility to care for the earth, and also because of our responsibility for those who are less fortunate. So what can we do? The two things that we really must do is that we have to move off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Scientists are already saying that we need to be off of fossil fuels within 15 years. That's going to be very hard to do. It's going to take a Herculean effort, similar to the kind of effort that we had starting World War II, where everybody pulls in the same direction to try to move us off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. We are saying that we want to have the energy sector in particular be fossil-free, carbon-free by 2030. And most of the rest of the economy fossil-free by 2050. That's probably pushing it even. We probably should be moving faster than that. But we need to move off of fossil fuels. That's the major cause of the problem. And that's the, first, do no harm. That's the first thing we have to do. And then the second thing is that we have to build resilience to changes that are already in the pipeline. We already have warming. There's more warming that's already sort of on the way. And we have to figure out ways to protect ourselves and to protect our economy and our community from the changes that are either coming or are soon to come. There's fortunately, there is lots that we can do. These are in both of those areas. So energy efficiency is something that we haven't really done a lot of in Kansas. There's a lot of room to grow there. Renewables, we have done a lot of in Kansas. The wind sector is already over 30% of our energy sector, but there's a lot more room to grow, particularly in the area of solar. We've done very well with industrial level wind, but we've done somewhat less well in solar. Distributed generation means sort of smaller scale energy production. So you can have neighborhood solar, you could have solar on your house, everybody recognizes, but you can also have kind of community farms, solar farms that generate electricity for a smaller area, like a neighborhood or part of a city. We need to decarbonize our transportation sector, which is starting to happen. We need a lot more electric cars and that sort of thing, and the electricity to support those cars needs to be generated by non-fossil means. Regenerative agriculture. Agriculture is a very carbon-intensive sector as we do it now, feedlots and that sort of thing. So we need to figure out ways that we can farm carbon, bringing more carbon into the ground. That's an important way of addressing carbon in the atmosphere is putting it back into the ground. Also, sort of bringing down, building resilience in the food sector would mean growing food locally, sourcing more of our food locally. In Kansas, 90% of the fruits and vegetables we eat are grown elsewhere. That's not a sustainable way to live, particularly when they're being grown in places like California that are even more susceptible to climate than we are. So we need to bring our energy production and our transportation and our food generation closer to home. Building resilience into our systems. And we are calling for a state energy plan to move us off of fossil fuels particularly in the energy sector, as I mentioned, by 2030, and then a climate plan that would address some of these resilience issues going forward. What can you do? People need to be convinced that this is an important issue, that people care about this issue. We live in a political situation where, if you don't talk about it, it doesn't get done. Everybody thinks that everybody's concerned about climate. Many people are concerned about climate change, but they're not sure that their neighbors are. So the most important thing we can do is make sure that our neighbors know that we're concerned about climate change. And that's putting it out there, talking to your friends, organizing. We have this wonderful thing now, the Kansas City Metro Climate Action Coalition. There's plenty of room for growth in those areas. Making sure that your pastor and your congregation are linked in with denominational resources, creation care resources. Lutherans Restoring Creation is a good example of that, but it's not the only one, obviously. But the more that people know that you're concerned about this, the more they will recognize that it's okay to be concerned about this, and also that there'll be political pressure put on our leaders to deal with this in a comprehensive and timely manner, which is what we really need. 75% of people never talk about climate change. I'm sure you could sit in church for many, many weeks and never hear the words climate change. And that cannot stay going. That is not sustainable. That cannot continue. We really need to talk about it. And the other piece of this that I didn't put a slide in about is that there's a lot of kind of grief around this. So we've known about this for a long time. We're scared about it. Faith communities are in a really good position to sort of hold that grief and to help each other sort of cope with the fear of the future, which we're all living with. I know that I've said that there's things that we can do, we must do, but there's also things that we can never get back. And people of faith are in a good position to sort of comfort ourselves, comfort each other, and address that from a values point of view. People are responding. We're seeing that even in Kansas. As I mentioned, the Climate Action Coalition, which is there on the bottom right, they are a group that was started by some local elected officials in Johnson County and Kansas City metro area. That's great that people are coming together on this. Of course, the Sunrise Movement and other kinds of activism has been happening all over the world. There's been rallies and all over the world on this issue because governments are not moving as quickly as we need them to. Corporations are also responding. The economy is also responding. People realize that there's a cost to this, that there's a lot of financial risk in not addressing climate change, some of which I'll talk about here. Extreme weather events are expensive. If we have a hurricane that knocks out Houston or that knocks out Puerto Rico, that's billions of dollars in damage, and it's billions of dollars in lost economic opportunity. We often hear about how can we afford to address climate change in the comprehensive way that we need to. The alternative is of not doing anything is far, far, far more expensive, trillions of dollars in damage, both in terms of health effects and in terms of the impact on the economy. There's direct health effects. There's direct health benefits of dealing with climate change in terms of the developmental disabilities and asthma and the kind of health impacts that we talked about earlier. And also there's a huge amount of job and economic opportunity in terms of building the world, building the technology that's going to be needed for both resilience and mitigation of climate of carbon in the atmosphere. So energy efficiency, water consumption, building a new transportation sector, building an energy sector, building doing green building design and retrofitting, sustainable agriculture. All of these are areas of growth. All of these are areas where there can be huge numbers of jobs. We worry often about what happens to people who are in fossil fuel industries as we move away from them. The answer is we need to make sure that they're taken care of, and one of the ways they can be taken care of is by deploying them as part of the green future, as part of the climate-friendly future. And these jobs cannot be outsourced. So the example I often use is if you take a place like, just let's take a random example of Hutchinson, Kansas. So you've got all this building stock that needs to be upgraded, that needs to be retrofitted to make it more energy efficient. That has to be done by people who live there, who go to the schools, who buy in the supermarket. These jobs they're not wildcatter jobs, and they can't be sent overseas. They need to be done by people here at home. And also relying on sort of economics that are not energy intensive, such as care economies and teaching and human care and medicine and that sort of thing, which are the caring professions, which are often seen as being sort of less important or less less important or less valuable, but yet they are very carbon neutral and should be focused on as we move towards trying to build a world where people can make a living without having to ruin the atmosphere. This is not a moment, it's a movement. It's going to take all of us to get to where we need to go. And that's all of us, meaning every aspect of society, including people of faith who are able to bring a values framing to this in a way that often, that are focused on the economy, often cannot. When we think about the work that we do at Kansas Interfaith Action, we talk about bringing a moral point of view to public policy, and that's exactly what's called for at this time. When we talk about, as I started, God caring for the world, or concern for the poor, or concern for our neighbors, those are things that people of faith are uniquely positioned to articulate. Those kind of values, those kinds of concerns, because we focus on what's underneath, not just the bottom line. And that's something that we uniquely bring to this conversation. So I want to encourage you. I mentioned resilientkansas.org earlier. I also mentioned Kansas Interfaith Action. If you care to follow us or get involved with the work that we're doing, we are always looking for folks who are interested in putting their values into action, putting their faith into action to help build a cleaner and more just world. So thanks very much for your attention. I look forward to seeing you in the future, and we're always available for conversation or to come visit your congregation. We need we need all of us to build the future that we need. So I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.